Brian, do you want to go ahead and kick us off here?
Sure. Well, first I'd like to welcome everyone here to our second live public meeting regarding the Cross County Trail East feasibility study. To introduce us, my name is Brian Olszak. I'm a senior trails and open space planner with the Montgomery County Planning Commission. And the Planning Commission is the sponsoring entity for this project. And as a part of this grant-funded project, which was funded by a grant from DVRPC, which is the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, we hired NV5, which is a consulting planning and engineering firm out of Philadelphia. And Matt Ledwig here is with me. He is a senior engineer and project manager, and he's the lead with the NV5 team here today. So just a brief overview of what we'll be doing tonight. It's going to be a little different than our first public meeting, if you've managed to make that. This will be a little less formal. We'll be focusing tonight on an actual question and answer and discussion. And so throughout the night, if you drop in or drop out, that's totally fine. If you have a specific question based upon something that we're talking about, you can either raise your hand, which is located on the bottom of your screen, or you can chat us and saying that you have a question, and then we can pick you up and we'll be able to unmute you and you'll be able to talk with us. But right now, if you're trying to mute or unmute right now, you won't be able to do that. But if you let us know that you're ready to ask us a question or you have something to say, we'll be able to turn your mic and camera on for you. So right now, I'm going to let Matt here give us a little intro into where we are with the project and a couple of things that are available right now on our project website to interact with and to give us feedback about some of the exciting alternatives that we'll be talking about tonight. So Matt, why don't you take it away?
All right, thanks, Brian. I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off and share my screen here. So if you're joining us tonight, presumably you came to us through the project website, which is montcopa.org/Cross County Trail East. I'll just go ahead and throw that into the chat real quick. But that is the website. Brian and I did a little bit longer video, about 25 minutes long, to talk about the project. We're just gonna do a very condensed view of that here over the next few minutes, and then get right into the Q&A. But wanted to be able to point that out for folks that may have signed up for this session tonight and have not seen the project website. Definitely recommend you check that out. One, the video. Two, checking out the virtual project map, which we'll walk through here in a few minutes, and then we'll go from there. Let me pull up the PowerPoint. So what we're going to talk about tonight, or the map that we released, that I'll show up here in a few minutes. There's basically three different types of trail sections that we're looking at. One being a separated trail. I think a lot of people are probably familiar with this. This is what you would see with either the Pennypack Trail or the Power Line Trail. The image on the left is the Veterans Memorial Trail in Willow Grove. These are independent rights of way. They're either paved or crushed stone. They're fully ADA accessible. And the benefit with this is they're usually in natural corridors and they're separated from traffic. I would be shocked to see if anyone disagrees with me on this, but they're the highest of quality of bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. The next typology that we're looking at in this study is a side path. So it too is a shared use path. It is 10 feet wide. It's typically paved, but the difference here is that it is within the right of way of another street or road, located parallel to that road. And the negatives to this is that you see that it crosses more driveways and more intersections, but a positive to a side path is it does allow connectivity to more places like businesses, grocery stores, apartment complexes, as an alternate to being able to not have to use the road to make those connections, but being on a completely safe and separated side path. The third typology that you'll see tonight is something that's called the neighborhood greenway. So this is a situation where bicyclists are riding in the street with traffic, pedestrians are walking on the sidewalk, and it's a traffic calm street. So we're selecting streets that are already low volume. They're typically residential streets. They're streets that are not used to cut through the neighborhood or that have a high amount of traffic. But we still would want to introduce some traffic calming elements. Sometimes you'll see on this particular rendering here that we did for a street not within the project limits, but in a portion of Philadelphia, the speed limit has actually been lowered to 20 miles an hour. Again, to inform people that this is a different kind of street. This is a street where bicyclists take priority and cars are kind of a guest on that street. Now, there's typically little to no loss of on-street parking. People still have access to their homes. It doesn't change the access or mobility of the street. It is just calming the traffic down, making it more comfortable for folks to ride in the street. Here's another example of one that's in a neighborhood greenway that's in Portland, Oregon. So places like the Pacific Northwest, Minneapolis is another place. They've really embraced this neighborhood greenway concept to be able to make a full network connection where it isn't possible to build shared use paths. So speed control is a big thing. You see a speed hump in this image. Parking is still allowed. They do curb bump outs and fully updated ADA ramps at the corners. There's wayfinding signage, there's warning signage. So it's really not, it's a very low cost way to utilize a neighborhood street to be able to facilitate bicycling on and make it comfortable. So this is the map of alternatives that we put together. We go more detail in the 25-minute video that's on the website. So if you want more information on how this was developed, we'll give a little bit more info there. But this map and the virtual map that I'll show you in a second, we broke down the typologies into colors on this map so people get an idea of what we're thinking of trying to make that connection from Upper Dublin to the Pennypack Trail, what different typologies they may encounter along the way. So I'll pull up the virtual project map real quick here. So if you're back at the project website, you go down to the second bullet where it says check out the map. And you click on that, you'll get a pop-up here. And then in order to make comments on the map, you do have to enter in your email address. So I will go ahead and put in my email address and continue to the map. And this is very similar to what I just had pulled up on the presentation. It has the different color codings to show the separated trails, which is the Greenway Trail that you're probably familiar with, the orange side paths, and the blue neighborhood greenways. And then in green, we show other existing trails, like the Pennypack Trail, the future Upper Dublin portion of the Cross County Trail is on the far left side of the screen here. So when you are looking at this, there's different segments. And if you hover over a segment, you'll get a little pop-up that shows you the different alternatives. So you can kind of take a look at this map and think, oh, you may live in Hatboro and say, I really want this path to come up in my neck of the woods and connect down to the Pennypack. So I'm going to take a look at these paths, and you can click on that particular path. This pop-up will come up and it'll give you a description It'll tell you where it begins and where it ends. It sometimes will give you a rendering of that particular segment, sometimes just an example photo. But then you can vote on, yes, I would want to use this segment. I would feel comfortable with this. This is where I would like to see it. You may also say, I really don't want to see it be located on this street. You can vote for or against that. And then you may also leave comments on that particular segment. I am not going to vote for this. Go ahead and close that. But you can go ahead also and just kind of get a feel for things, open things up one at a time. Get an understanding of what segment 16 here looks like. Read this, take a look at the illustration, and then you can close it out. And then once you can come back and make those voting decisions later on. If you want to, you can also click on the add routes portion. You can click on desired new trail route. Maybe you don't like any of these routes. You can click on this and you can go ahead and click on the map and tell us, hey, I think y'all should take a look at going around the YMCA on the other side. If you're doing this, I highly recommend to turn off the snap to route function because otherwise it tries to snap to streets that are already on here. And if you're trying to do something that's off street, it just makes it a little bit easier. You can also add points. If there's a key destination that we're skipping here that you still want to be able to make a connection to, let us know. Or if there's unsafe areas along these routes that you think we should know about. These are two other functions that you can use. So yeah, I'll go back to the presentation real quick. There was a couple of questions that were brought up beforehand. One question that someone had posted in their registration was concern about crossing the busier highways along the way. And that's definitely a good question, a good thing to bring up. One thing that we will be working with PennDOT, since the busier highways tend to be PennDOT routes, this is a relatively new design feature that some municipalities throughout North America have been doing, but it's called a corner bump out. It still allows, and the reason you see at where two highways intersect, you have these big, huge sweeping turns. It's to allow trucks to be able to make turns, trucks with trailers to make turns. But the negative to that is that people in cars, trucks, SUVs, they can take those turns really fast, and that makes for a dangerous bicycle or pedestrian crossing. So one way to combat that is to be able to make these mountable curb areas within the corners where it still allows that big semi tractor trailer truck to be able to make that turn. Their trailer would just bounce up on the mountable curb area that you see here in red. But then people in a passenger car, pickup trucks, SUVs, if they were to hit that, they could still technically drive over it, but it would create a bumpy ride. And in order to prevent that, it creates a sharper turn. It slows that traffic down and just creates that shorter turning radius to make that turn. So this is one solution. We'll be working with PennDOT as we move forward throughout this study to determine the feasibility of doing this along the way. So that's one solution. Other solutions are things like raised crosswalks, traffic signals that get what's called a leading pedestrian interval. So after a signal goes all red in all four directions, the pedestrians and bicyclists on the trail would get their signal first for a few seconds. That allows the trail users to get out into the street, get out into the crosswalk, make themselves visible, and then the traffic gets the green light, traffic in the parallel direction gets the green light, and then that way any right turning traffic sees the trail user already in the crosswalk rather than the the vehicle darting out in front of them. So I wanted to address that since that was a specific question, but we'll go ahead and open it back up. Oh, Brian is muted. Let me unmute you.
Thanks, man.
That Brian?
So yeah, so now essentially, I think, Matt, the floor is essentially open now. Is that right? So
Yes.
why don't we now let people, well, so essentially it's if anyone would like to speak or have a question or a comment, and would like to speak, yes, please raise your hand or feel free to chat into your question into the chat. Oh, actually, we already have one now. Let's see, so Melissa and Pete Childs say estimated completion date. It's a great question. Cutting right to the punch there. So so first, let's say the estimated completion date of the study is around March and April of 2022. So for the study, we're going to have one more round of public review come around December or January time, when we'll, through this public process, have determined a proposed single alignment for this trail. And so once we go through the public review of that and then figure out whether there's any tweaks we need to make, we'll publish the report. And then comes the interesting part, which is trying to actually design the trail. So because we're talking about 5 or 6 miles worth of trail, it's going to be likely in stages. And so sometimes it can take, depending upon the challenges and the impediments in the proposed right away of a trail, it can take several years to design. So so Matt, I don't know if we would probably put an estimated date on this entire stretch, but we could easily start our design process as early as 2022, mid-year of 2022. And in design, we often have to look at right-of-way acquisition, stormwater management, more close coordination with utilities, PennDOT, and many other agencies.
Yeah, that hit the hammer, the nail on the head. I think that's I know people want to know when these things are going to be open. That's very exciting to see these happen, but it's definitely a multi-year process, and the county relies on funding from DVRPC, from PennDOT, from other sources. It's very competitive funding. I know with the current infrastructure bill in Congress, there is an increase in that kind of funding, so that's good to hear. But yeah, it's just hard to nail down a time frame on completion of the whole thing. So related to that, we have a question from Mark asking, what is the availability of right-of-way for the off-road options? That's a really good question. It definitely varies. And part of the reason we are doing this feasibility study is to look at places that have either wide rights of way, like say a Blair Mill Road, or places that are already publicly owned. Like the YMCA is not publicly owned, but places that already have kind of a shared public interest. We certainly wouldn't want to be able to design a trail in front of 20 residential properties and have to go get a 5-foot easement from 20 different residential properties along the street. That's something that's just, I don't think the county would want to do that anyway, but that takes a lot of time to be able to go through 20 different easement acquisition processes. It's a very time-consuming process. So we're trying to find routes that already are located within public rights of way or located within properties where the landowner would be interested in having the trail there. One particular location, or a couple of places that we're looking at, for example, through the Horsham Business Park, where there may be an interest in connecting office buildings with one another with the shared use path, even though that it's all privately owned property, it's off-road trail. There's with a lot of those properties, there's one commercial ownership of the properties, and coordination with one property owner, even though there's many different parcels, coordination with one owner that may have an interest in putting a shared use path in those areas is definitely a lower bar of trying to get things going. So once we get the final preferred alternative developed, we'll have a better answer to what the availability of the right-of-way is. We'll nail down how many parcels will require easements, and what that will also kind of play into how the project is phased. The portions of the project that have fewer right-of-way hurdles may be the first ones to go. So that's the next time we have a public meeting, probably in the January timeframe. Those are the kind of things that we'll talk about, the right-of-way and the costs and phasing and things like that.
And if you're familiar with some of the other trails in the county, like the Pennypack Trail, the Powerline Trail, you may know that these are all built along a single entity rights of way. So the Powerline Trail, as the name suggests, is entirely along a PICO right of way. So there was only one property owner where we needed to, or where Horsham needed to do the negotiating and design with. Similarly, with the Pennypack Trail, it's built almost entirely along a SEPTA right of way. The former Newtown Railroad there. So again, that was a relatively simple, although still had many complications associated with it. This trail, though, by comparison, is actually is much more difficult. So there isn't a natural corridor to use with one or even a few property owners to work with. So we've got our work cut out for us, but we're ready to do the work anyway.
All right, the next, it's not really a question, but it's a statement. Ron says, I would prefer fewer street crossings, even if the route is slightly longer, as the danger crossing streets is not worth any savings in time. So that's a good comment. I'd be interested in what other people on the call tonight, what their opinions are on that matter. If you would prefer, generally speaking, if you would prefer a longer route that prevents as many roadway crossings as possible, or if you prefer the shorter route that may have to cross more roads or go through more traffic signals. But that's why we wanted to be able to have different alternatives here. And that's where the comments on the map and the voting really kind of comes into play. We want to see what's the preference of people. Do they want to be able to make direct connections to certain businesses that are located along roadways? And I guess I just want to make it clear that that's not to say that that couldn't happen, that if the ultimate route is selected on this map, these other linkages and connections can still happen through the local municipality. As many people are probably aware, Upper Moreland, Hatboro did a trails master plan. They just completed it last year. And a lot of these routes are also on the Upper Moreland Hatboro trails plan. So it's not to say that couldn't happen in the future. The specific scope of what we're doing with Montgomery County is looking at the regional trails network and how we're going to make that big major connection between the cross-county trail that's being developed in Upper Dublin Township and how we're going to get to the Pennypack Trail. Those other connections would be the responsibility of the municipalities.
It's also interesting to note that there are certain situations where a crossing may be so onerous or potentially dangerous that we would, consider potentially looking into the feasibility of a bridge structure over that intersection. Actually, further west on the Cross County Trail, we're currently in the feasibility and stages of figuring out how we might be able to build a bridge, a trail bridge over Germantown Pike, right at the intersection of Chemical Road. So currently the Cross County Trail starts at the Schuylkill River Trail along the river, and then goes through Conshohocken and Plymouth Township, and then terminates right there at Chemical Road in Germantown, because there's no obvious way to get across. And so that's one example where we've determined that we're interested in learning more about what kind of bridge structure may be feasible at that location. But bridges, as you may figure, are always a little more expensive, sometimes a lot more expensive than a simple crossing. So when we get to the cost benefit analysis of that type of situation, that's sort of when we decide if something may be worth the money to to implement a crossing situation like that.
Yeah, we just had a comment come up too, Brian, that just kind of ties right into that. And somebody mentions that they live in Horsham and they use both Pennypack and Powerline trails, and they usually cross 611 and Blair Mill Road. And that kids also like to bike to school. So they're wondering about easier access across 611 for myself and for the kids, curious about Sky Bridge, like the Pinellas Trail in Florida near Clearwater and St. Pete's. I know there are a number of elevated trails. This would be great for schools and businesses. So, yeah, couldn't agree more. I'm not familiar with that specific bridge in Florida. I'll have to take a look at that once we get off here tonight. But yeah, the other issue with the bridges is the specific bridge that Brian mentioned over Chemical Road is because that there's already a grade separation between the roadway and the trail. If you don't have that grade separation, there's quite a bit of, in order to meet Americans with Disabilities Act requirements, there's a pretty decent amount of ramping that it takes to get up, over, and then back down. So that's another constraint that we have to deal with in looking at pedestrian bridges over roadways. Tunneling, like doing basically a culvert underneath the road, is an option as well. But again, there's the same kind of constraint with ramping down to get below the roadway as opposed to over it. So there's a lot of things to consider. There's utilities, there's all these things, and that's why we do this study now. So that way, when the county gets into the engineering phase in the future, those kind of things have already been thought about. It helps narrow down the scope of the engineering that's needed, and that way, the county's not spending years and years in the engineering phase.
Right.
So. And it's not to say things couldn't be a phased approach either, that in the short term, it may be an at-grade crossing with, and once the funding comes in, then a bridge or an underpass is developed in a particular location. So, but that's why we work with PennDOT on this project. We've already met with them once. We're going to be meeting with them again once we get the final alignment determined. PennDOT is always receptive to these kind of things. You know, they don't want to see negative interactions on the roadway either. They are all about safety as well. So this is very important to them.
But we, going back to 611 and Blair Mill Road, we, Matt and I, we're actually out on that intersection a few months ago at this point, sort of scoping it out. And it is certainly a busy intersection, one that would be difficult for anyone to cross, but we did actually also see children on bikes in that vicinity as well. So it is happening. So we concur, and yeah, that's actually probably a larger intersection than the Chemical and Germantown Road intersection. So that would be an interesting thing to look into. We'll that's the good thing about feasibility studies, is that we're keeping everything on the table right now, and we're sort of judging them on their merits right now. We're not married to anything at this point. So that's what these studies are for, is to learn about what are the real pressure points with people, and sort of what are the various kinds of steps that we can take, from the least expensive to the most expensive, and also to from the least invasive to the most invasive too, as well, on the landscape.
And it helps set the stage we haven't been boxed into any costs at this point. This study will determine those costs, and project them out in the future, of course. But that's the good thing about this now is we're not, once you get into the engineering stage, you tend to be more boxed into a budget because you've already developed what the scope of the project is going to be, but we're not there yet. So that's the good news.
Let's see. So yes, it's an open invitation to speak your mind. If you have any comments, remember, feel free to chat them in, or to raise your hand and we can unmute you, and we can let you speak as well.
Yeah, and if you have any questions about a specific segment, we can pull the map back up on the screen. We can walk through logistics or why we chose a particular route. We're more than happy to kind of get our hands dirty here and get into the weeds of things if people have any specific questions about a segment. Actually,
Matt, why don't you pull up that that map again? I did want to mention something that I recently spoke to a resident from Uppermoreland who had a question about the traffic signal icons that we have on that map. Okay, so you'll be able to see here, if you're in the map, that we actually have posted the existing signalized crossings to give you a sense of what kind of if there's a traffic light, if it's currently signalized or not, to help weigh your considerations. But we also have places where there are potential new signalized crossings. Now it's important to note that this does not necessarily mean that one is in the works right now, or that we're even talking about your sort of red, yellow, and green light type of traffic signal. We put these on here to indicate that it's possible to put some sort of signal here if that may persuade you to say, oh, well, then I would see that this type of situation would be safer if there were some sort of signal here. Now, there's various types of signals that could go in that are specifically designed for pedestrians and bicyclists. One of the examples is what's called an RRFB, which is a rectangular rapid flashing beacon. Does that sound right, man?
Yep.
And these are designed to quickly call attention to traffic that may be driving in that particular area, to indicate that there is a pedestrian or bicyclist or someone approaching the crossing and is actually in the crossing right now. These can be push button type signals, or they're actually also developing signals that sense whether there is a potential pedestrian or bicyclist approaching the signal, and it will automatically click on, which is really great. That's something that we're actually working to install right on the Pennypack Trail at the crossing of Turwood, which I don't think is on this map. But if you're familiar with where the Pennypack crosses there, we're in the process of installing some right at that point right there. So you won't need to remember to press a button or anything. It will sense that you're there. And so a similar thing could exist at any of these proposed or potential new signalized crossings. So just to give you a sense of sort of what would be possible in those situations.
All right, we have another question coming in from Mason, who says, I noticed a path cross throughout the Upper Moreland High School. How would that work with the school involved? All right, that's a good question. So we looked at, tell you what, I'm gonna pull up my other map here that has a little bit more of an aerial background. So we wanted to be able to, we thought the high school was a major point of interest. We want to be able to make a connection there. It's very close to the Veterans Memorial Park trail and path, and you know, to be able to make a connection to the businesses near the Willow Grove SEPTA station. There's a whole host of reasons why we thought it'd be great to integrate the high school into a potential alignment. So in looking at the area, you see the blue line here. We had to use a neighborhood greenway connection to get across York Road. But if I zoom in here in a little bit more detail, our thought is we don't want to be able to, we wouldn't be able to go through a playing field here. And I know topography is a bit of an issue here because of the big hill that the playing fields are built into. But and it's not to say that this would be the exact route. We'd work with the school district. You know, it's potential that it would go down around the west side of the building instead of following the SEPTA rail line. But I guess this is just a little bit more detailed look at the potential route near the high school. And then our thinking is, if this route were to be selected, crossing Turwood Road right at the SEPTA overpass, and then being able to make a connection somehow through the Joint Sewer Authority property that would then be able to connect into, cross Pennypack Creek and get into the YMCA existing trails. And this is a path in this general alignment that connects the Veterans Memorial Park, connects north, connects to the YMCA, and then eventually connects into Hatboro. If you're not familiar, there is an existing path in Hatboro between the SEPTA rail station and along the rail line down to Fulmer Avenue. So it connects this community here up to the SEPTA station. So the thought of being able to connect those two SEPTA stations, those two business districts to one another, and making those bike plan connections into other neighborhoods, you know, that's a really appealing thing. So even if the final alignment of the Cross County Trail does not utilize one of these two, I'll call it spurs or connections, that's still a great, those are still great connections that can be made by the borough, by the township to connect to the Cross County Trail and connect to the high school.
Hey, Matt, it looks like we have a couple questions in our Q&A box here.
All right. Chris asks, are recreational trails necessarily in conflict with floodplains? What does a trail design need to consider when moving across frequently flooded areas? Yeah, that's a really good question. A lot of times you do see trails in floodplains because one, it's typically publicly owned land. It's a wooded area, usually a recreational area. And there's a lot of reasons why trails are located in those areas. But there's some reasons why, you know, with floodplains and we're seeing an increase in the interval of flooding in some areas. Considerations have to be made about the effects that the impervious areas have on in the watershed, the maintenance and operations of the trail. So there's a whole host of reasons. There's pros and cons. certainly to trails within floodplains. So that's definitely part of the process that we're going through right now and thinking about the resiliency of the trail as a whole. It is a recreational trail, but it's also a transportation resource. And we don't want to have it out 5 days a year, 10 days a year, because another flood along Pennypack Creek occurred and washed out a section of trail or left a bunch of silt sitting on the path. Now unfortunately with trails, some of you may have heard of the use of pervious pavement, where it's kind of an open graded pavement. It's still asphalt, but when water falls on that asphalt, the water can still seep directly into the ground rather than running off and into the nearest water course, which causes urban flooding. Pervious pavements are difficult because heavy loads tend to create damage on them. They're just not as strong structurally as the asphalt that you see on a neighborhood street or a highway. But the good news about trails is you don't see those heavy loads. The firm I work for, we're actually engineering a path just on the other side of the river in New Jersey to be that pervious asphalt pavement. We're going to do, it'll be about 30 miles long. And most of it will be of this pervious asphalt. And we've done some other projects in the region where we've done it in parking lots, and they've lasted, they're 10 years old now, and they're still in really good shape. There's a little bit of a higher maintenance factor involved. Leaves tend, because it's porous, there's pores in the asphalt. Leaves or any other materials that fall on the trail have to be vacuumed up a couple of times a year. So yes, you literally have to vacuum the asphalt to keep it clean, to allow that water to percolate through. So there's solutions, but again, there's a whole host of things that kind of go into play here with the floodplains. We try to definitely stay out of the floodway, which is the area closest to the creek. We try to stay as much to the fringe of the floodplain as possible. There's a lot of permitting aspects that go into it too. Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection has permitting regulations to be able to put even a bridge over the floodplain. There's a lot of permitting regulations that are involved in the engineering phase. So a lot of considerations that have to go that are involved with that.
Great, thank you. I'm going to move to the next one here, which is from Carl. If a particular route is selected, is it possible that the spur routes are constructed at the same time, such as connections to the Veterans Memorial Park, Half Road train station, or Power Line Trail? It's possible. It wouldn't be done necessarily by us, Montgomery County. Because we're sponsoring the project, and we will one day likely own and manage the trail. We're right now, the scope of our work is focused on a single alignment, but we are very interested in working with our partner communities, and we have been for many years when it comes to trail development. So in Upper Moreland, for instance, if we are if we're at a stage where we know that we're going to design and finally build a segment of a trail that has some potential spurs next to it, we can coordinate with that community. So in this case, Upper Moreland, and then we can run those projects at the same time, so that there's additional places to go and additional destinations to go to. We may build our trail, and then Upper Moreland may build its trail connecting to our trail. But throughout this process, we've been very interested in making sure that the final alignment that we eventually decide upon coincides very well with existing trail plans in Upper Moreland and Hatboro in this instance, so that we want to make those trail connections that are in the comprehensive trail plan that Upper Moreland has more useful, more valuable, because they'll connect to a regional trail like the Cross County Trail. So we can definitely work on the phasing with individual municipalities to perhaps coordinate spur trails, but it wouldn't be necessarily us doing the actual work of building them. It would be the respective municipality involved.
All right, Brian, I got another question for you.
Okay.
In view of cost considerations, are routes more likely to go forward if they utilize more neighborhood greenways and side paths as opposed to the separate paths?
This is a good question. Because we are interested in developing and owning and maintaining the trail one day, that won't necessarily be true, especially if it's a neighborhood greenway, since it essentially is the street, the public street, which will probably generally be owned by a township. So I guess the more complete answer is that our goal in this project is to get to build an accessible multi-use trail for as long of a stretch as we can. We may necessarily need to involve neighborhood greenways and side paths as a part of that, but sort of our first goal is to try to have a separated path as much as possible. Although that being said, a side path is probably equally viable in many instances. Actually, in Upper Dublin Township, where Upper Dublin is building the trail for us, many of those segments are side paths, and so there's nothing inherently less expensive necessarily about side paths. It does tend to utilize existing right-of-way, that of a street. So sometimes it's easier to when it comes to acquisition, but it is a similar, at least 10 foot, even 12-foot wide asphalt or cinder path, and so we're interested in those as well. Neighborhood greenways, again, they're definitely useful, especially for making local connections, but that's not necessarily what may limit us in terms of this project, purely from cost considerations. It'll be a factor, but it won't be the major factor.
It was more of a function of being able to give multiple alternatives on the project. I'm gonna go back to sharing the map real quick, just so I can kind of speak to it. The way we kind of started out this alternatives analysis is knowing, you see the two red triangular icons on here. Those are generally the point A and the point B that we wanted to connect to. And we took a look at, we wanted to at least give a minimum of 3 different alternatives to get from those 2 points. So we developed, really, in generally speaking, a northern connection. I don't know if people could see my mouse moving or not, but a southern connection that would kind of wrap near Upper Moreland High School, and then a central connection. And if you follow the central connection, most of the central connection that roughly parallels the turnpike and the Norfolk Southern Railroad, that does use a path. There is a way to use a path that does not use any neighborhood greenway segments. We wanted to try to find a way to, as Brian said, use a continuous shared use path on both the northern and southern alternatives, but because of the built out environment of those particular neighborhoods, there just wasn't that ability. Now, if a particular group of residents got together and said, you know what, we would be fine if you narrowed our street and got rid of our on-street parking and built a side path right in front of our houses, we would certainly love to hear that at this point. But we have to kind of weigh the costs of doing that. That can be very expensive because there's usually a lot of landscaping involved, right-of-way acquisition involved, drainage issues, not drainage issues, but just drainage concerns that have to be addressed. So it's not to say it would be easier by any means, but it would be possible. But just based on previous experience, people generally are not keen to narrowing down their streets, removing parking, and building side paths directly in front of their houses. So that's where, but believe me, we spent many a days looking at different alternatives, different ways to connect these areas, even through Hatboro and through the Upper Moreland High School, how to connect that with the shared use path. If I were to go back to my Google map here, we did a lot of mapping. We have a color coded, I won't go into the detail of the color coding on here, but we mapped out all the parcels in the area. We looked at the parcels that are privately owned, that are publicly owned, that are owned by single entities or like businesses. And all that goes into consideration of how we're developing these routes. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and to be able to get to where we are with this mapping, you know, it's difficult to find these alternatives, but yeah, I'm kind of swaying from the point, but the point is that I think if we had the ability to, we would have wanted more shared use paths in these areas where there are neighborhood greenways, but the geometry just limits what we can do in those areas.
It's interesting to also add there that, you know, a neighborhood greenway can be installed or implemented, you know, sort of without necessarily a continuous connecting trail on either side of it. It's, you know, overall, you know, we as planners and engineers, you know, we want safer streets in our residential neighborhoods overall, and neighborhood greenways are a novel way to slow traffic and to sort of give streets back to you know, people in whether they be pedestrians, bicyclists, you know, some other variant of that. But it does have the effect of slowing cars, and especially, you know, in residential neighborhoods. So we think that it's a positive step, you know, regardless of whether it's a part of this trail.
All right, we've had a lot of good questions tonight. That's great. So the lines are currently open. If you have any other questions, like I said earlier, if you want to get down to the nitty gritty of a particular street or an intersection, we're more than happy to get into that. And nobody wants to be unmuted. They want to do it via chat box.
Hey, that's okay too. You know, for the sake of information, I'll let everyone know that I did also receive a phone call from a resident, actually in the vicinity of Blair Mill, and I think it's Sycamore. It's sort of in the Blair Mill area. Yeah, sort of right there. If you wanted to zoom in on that a bit. Could you tell us a little bit about, Matt, sort of what's going on in this part of the neighborhood here? There is this is a place where there's a potential side path along Blair Mill, and then these neighborhood greenway options here.
Yeah, so our first alternative that we looked at in this particular area was along Blair Mill Road, and I'm going to go back to the aerial map here real quick. But yeah, obviously we want to cross 611 at a signalized intersection. But we looked at this particular intersection. The negative to this is in order to get to the side path, and the side path being on the north side of Blair Mill because of that right-of-way availability. When you get on the other side, the residential properties are directly abutting Blair Mill Road. There's no public space available on the south side of Blair Mill. So that's the reason why the side path would theoretically be on the north side of Blair Mill. But then in order to get to Broadway Avenue here, you'd have to cross the intersection twice. And that's not as a desirable movement to be. You essentially have to wait for a light. Even if you hit this one on a green, you'd still have to wait for another light to continue to go. So we wanted to at least give one other alternative in this area. So that's why, given that Broadway is going to be that neighborhood greenway typology, why not cross Blair Mill Road at Vesser Lane and then use Sycamore Avenue to get across. Sycamore Avenue is also a signalized intersection, being that this is a neighborhood greenway. Cyclists would be riding with traffic in this particular location. But there's definitely pros and cons to both of these alternatives here. Now, yeah, as we alluded to earlier, it's not to say that we could also look at, if this was the ultimate selected route, it's not to say we couldn't look at a grade separated crossing here. But with that, with the ramp leading up to that and a limited amount of right of way on Blair Mill on the north side, or I should say the east side of 611, it would be very difficult. You'd have to almost have to acquire the parking lot here at the pizza place here, which, you know, I don't think anybody wants to see that happen.
Yeah, there are some comments about the Blair Mill intersection overall with Easton Road. That's problematic, and that's actually partially sort of why there was the other suggestion for the neighborhood greenway option on Vesser and Sycamore. You know, we don't obviously want to encourage vehicular cut through traffic here, because I know that there are already there's already signage and other regulations that highly discourage or prohibit cut through traffic here. Although if it were more people, if it were more pedestrian or bicyclists cutting through, that, you know, that might be less of an issue than if we were to encourage cars. We wouldn't want to encourage more cut through traffic of the car variety there, most certainly.
Yeah, and one of the, I guess, to continue on that theme, if we were to go further to the east here, one of the things that we found an advantage, that this is where neighborhood greenways have an advantage, is where Hatboro Avenue dead ends. This is right at the Upper Moreland Hatboro line. Hatboro Avenue dead ends at this location here, and then eventually this becomes Mooreboro Road in Hatboro. But there is, go ahead and turn on the parcel layer quickly. There is a public, this is a public right of way across here. So you can do it. We didn't color code it for this little tiny segment here, but you could actually build a shared use path between these two segments here. And that would allow bicyclists and pedestrians to get through here, but it wouldn't allow for the cut through traffic. So the people that are on the street that enjoy that quieter street because it's not a cut through, they would see more people on bikes and people walking, but wouldn't see any more car traffic coming through. So that was one of the factors in deciding to use this connection, is you taking two quieter streets to make that connection.
Oh, now we've got a number of questions. This is always good. Let me start with the Q&A box here. So, is there funding in place for design and construction of this trail? The answer is largely no at this point, although there is money, or we do have funding in the county's capital budget, or it's proposed at this point. It will hopefully be adopted at the end of this year to be in the capital fund for next year. So we do have funding secured for design. Not of all of it, but a significant segment of it. So we can start design as early as next year. But for the construction funding, we do not currently have construction funding at this point. I think there was a.
Yeah, the next question, Brian, is have there been any considerations for where additional parking could go, like at the current Byberry Trail of the trailhead of the Pennypack?
That is a good question, because that is always something that you need to consider when trail planning, is to figure out how people are going to get to the trail. That's something that we well, right now we're the idea is that we are generally in favor of adding parking where we can fit it. That will probably come a little later after we've finalized an alignment to truly figure out where the opportunities are for parking. So the interesting part about this trail is that hopefully, since it's actually already going through a relatively developed area, is that many people will be able to access it without driving. So whether either walking or biking potentially to this trail. That's sort of that's the golden goose at this point. That would be our goal, is to allow people to get to a trail without having to drive to it. But we can look at other options for that ultimately. So that's sort of on our plate right now, but we haven't yet tackled it.
All right, and then the next question we have from Len is, have you described what would be possible at the intersection of Easton and Maryland Avenue if you go that direction? All right, this is a getting into the weeds kind of question. Let me pull screen back up. We'll go to Easton and Maryland. So this, yeah, we went through a couple of different iterations at this location. There is a Pico transmission line back here, and this is the Carrabba's. So we looked at staying behind the Carrabba's and completely avoiding Maryland Road altogether. But there's some issues with right-of-way, Pennsylvania Turnpike, right-of-way, and the parking lot. There really wasn't an avenue to be able to go that route. So we looked at, there's a sewer easement beside the storage facility here that kicks you out over the tributary, and then this would become a side path along Maryland Road. And then the thought here is to cross, obviously widening this to a shared use path standard, but crossing at the existing crosswalk at this location. And then in order to get down underneath the turnpike here and follow 611 here, we'd have to build a separate bridge over the tributary in this location. So it wouldn't be co-located on the road. It would have to be a separate bridge here. And then we have coordinated with the Pennsylvania Turnpike on modifications underneath the bridge here. They are open to that. So the slope that you see there'd be modifications to that embankment to allow for the trail to be located underneath here before getting off-road and following the Pico lines again. So to kind of go back to what we talked about earlier with crossing these busier roadways, there's traffic signal at this particular location. You only have when the green light is for Maryland Road, that's when folks would be able to cross here. I know it's predominantly a left. There's dual left here to go northbound on 611. But we definitely want to be able to slow down and control that right turning traffic going to southbound 611. So that way, anybody who's making that left turn is slowing down, sees the trail users, is allowing them to go. They would have the right of way. This would be, a perfect place to do that leading pedestrian interval where people using the trail get to go first, while no vehicle is using the intersection. The other benefit to this location is you only have one leg of Maryland that's active. There's not a leg on the other side. You wouldn't have any left turning traffic that would be trying to cross trail users at this location. So that's one benefit to this being a T intersection rather than a four-way intersection. So yeah, if I didn't fully answer your question, just let me know. I can try to get into the weeds a little bit more if that's what you're looking for. But yeah, this could be, if there was more space along the turnpike, could this be a candidate for a grade separated crossing? Perhaps. But that's something that, if this is an alignment, we would certainly take a look at that as well.
Hey, Matt, there's a question that it was in the chat here from Ron. The question was, would you think the trail would do better connecting to the existing Cross County Trail further south from the turnpike or further north?
That's that one.
And that's a
would be better.
That's a good question.
Further south from the turnpike or further north?
So one interesting thing to consider here is the bridge of Welsh Road over the turnpike there. That would essentially determine whether we went north or south of the turnpike. So I think we briefly looked at this when we consulted with the Turnpike Commission. They said that there were no recent and no immediate plans to replace this bridge or to do any work on this bridge, but the bridge itself is not really conducive to either being widened or to accommodate a trail on it right now. So it's possible. I mean, it might be a side path, or it might be a I think there might be a sidewalk.
Yeah, there's a 5-foot sidewalk on both sides.
So we put this option, I think, because we imagine that there is a potential to perhaps add a some sort of cantilevered piece, like extension of the bridge, which would be a trail only type of situation, which would be adjacent to the vehicular part. But I think this crossing is a challenge. I don't know. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. When we met with the Turnpike to discuss the potential for this, here's the street view of what this looks like right now. There's two very narrow sidewalks on it. The lanes are already as narrow as PennDOT would allow, so we couldn't. Sometimes we were able to kind of steal some space from the lanes, but in this case we wouldn't be able to. They're already at the minimum 10-foot width. There is a long-term vision of an interchange to the turnpike in this particular location. DVRPC has done some studies into that, but there's no funding dedicated to that. There's no immediate plans to do that. So we just don't know. We couldn't rely on, if we knew there was funding dedicated to it and it was 5 to 10 years down the road, we could say, oh yeah, let's get in here now. Let's talk to the turnpike. Let's plan on having a 10-foot shared use path put on the new bridge. That's something that can be coordinated, but since it's not even, it's not to that point right now. So it's not a definitive thing. It's possible that it doesn't happen. So we couldn't rely on that. If we were to go that route, as Brian said, we'd have to take a look at a modification of the current bridge to allow that side path to be built on that bridge. And we don't know. We haven't done full research on this bridge yet to see what the age is and what the conditions are. That would be if this was to be looked at in a little bit more serious manner, then those are the routes we'd go, is to see if it's even feasible to put the bridge or to put the path in that location. It's possible that if we wanted to span this location, that we would have to look at a separate pedestrian bridge in this location. So yeah, that's just all part of the process that we're going through right now, and part of the feasibility study.
Hey, Matt, there's another question in the chat from Bill. He asks, are sidewalks required on both sides? Shift lanes and widen sidewalk on higher use side to 10. That's probably
that's actually a possibility we looked at too. If we were to do that, we'd want to use I'll call it the north side here because of the shopping over here, the apartments over here. There's definitely a walking desire line between the shopping and apartments. Probably a little bit less. We'd have to go through a pedestrian study to see if that's even feasible. PennDOT would require that of us. And so I would say it's possible to do that. Now it's still to put a 10-foot shared use path immediately next to travel lanes with no buffer, with a 6 or an 8-inch curb drop off. That's a little bit of a scary situation in that, without having some sort of barrier up. And then you're also looking at skewing the lanes at the intersection, which it'll only be a few feet. So I don't see that would be a huge hurdle. But that is something that we have floated internally. And I think it remains on the table if we were more serious about using this as a crossing.
Yeah, and I think too, if it might sort of rank higher ultimately if we found that south of the turnpike was that a route south of there using this bridge was ultimately more beneficial than one to the north. And ultimately that is what we're deciding and what we're figuring out right now with your help. But it is important to note that on the north side of the turnpike, there is more opportunity for a separated trail in that immediate vicinity there, as you can see in the red. So, we're not going to call it now or anything, but that is sort of a significant factor that does factor in.
Right. Next one from James says, I realize it's pretty far north, but have you looked at Maple Avenue near Hallowed? There is a lead into 611 that has an open space on one side and the air base on the other.
I think, yeah, we're up in Horsham now.
Yeah, I'm not familiar.
It's a little, yeah, there it is. Maple Avenue is to the north there. It's just off your screen. Oh, there's Hollowell School.
There, okay, I see. Yeah, that would be quite I get that's probably, that could be a good crossing of 611, but the other factor would be in getting somehow, I guess, from the power line trail, potentially connecting through here. But yeah, with the ultimate goal of connecting from the intersection of Welsh Road and Dreshertown Road to the Pennypack Trail. Yeah, I think that would just be a difficult way to cross.
It might be a
Just
good
make
candidate
it
for,
for.
what's that? I'm sorry.
No, that I was just going to say what you were going to say. It would be a good candidate for a local connection.
Yeah. Especially for whatever development, ends up happening at the airbase there, when it becomes developable. That could be definitely an interesting thing for Horsham to look at, connecting to their power line trail. All right, we're nearing our the end of our time together, but the lines are still open for another 10 or 11 minutes.
Yeah, we've had a lot of good questions tonight. This is great. This is what it's all about. I'm glad people tuned in and are asking a lot of good things. Yeah, I said this in the video, but this is definitely one of the tougher trail feasibility studies we've done, just because not having a natural corridor, not having a continuous power line easement or abandoned rail right of way. You've got to find those little nooks and crannies where you can make that connections. And sometimes you find the nooks and crannies, but you can't, it's hard to make the connections to other places. So, one example that we looked at was along Mill Road. There's park space here. We really wanted to try to be able to connect it with a shared use path, but with the volume of traffic on Mill Road, it just kind of created a difficult way to kind of make that continuous connection into it. So there's definitely ways to connect from Mill Road through neighborhood streets to be able to get to the eventual trail, but as far as a continuous path it through the area, it proved to be very difficult.
So
Another question in here from Carl asking, would the engineering study consider all of these options, or would it consider one main path with a few small local alternatives?
So once we move to engineering and design, it will assume that we have picked a single alternative. And so remember, that's the goal of this study, is to assess all of our options right now, for the express purpose of creating a single main sort of trunk line for the trail. Now, ideally, as I mentioned before, that we are highly encouraging and are highly collaboratively minded to pick a line, or to pick a main alternative which connects to already planned spurs, especially the ones that are in the Upper Marlin Hatboro master trail plan, because those have already been vetted to an extent as being desirable to both Hatboro and Upper Marlin, and so we are similarly interested in building a trail one day that connects to these these spurs, and to make them more accessible. But yeah, so the engineering phase is much more detailed than even what we're discussing right now. Matt, do you want to just briefly talk about sort of what's involved in an engineering and design phase?
Yeah, so once the feasibility study is complete, we will have that one single route determined, and then the county will then go through a separate phase of engineering studies, and what's involved in that is a topographic survey, to be able to understand the exact elevations of curb lines and where sewer manholes are located and underground utilities and precise location of right-of-way and property lines. And then the trail is more located in a much more detailed manner. There's review with agencies, PennDOT, municipalities, the Department of Environmental Protection gets involved with permitting, especially like we talked about the floodplains earlier, but also erosion and sedimentation control measures. So we're thinking about what's going to happen during the construction of the project and any runoff that occurs during the construction. We have to permit that. There would be public meetings during the engineering phase as well. So, we want to give people an idea of how people that are located close to the trail, how it's going to affect them, potential detours during construction, if that's needed, give folks an idea what the design is going to look like, trailheads, parking, that sort of thing. But yeah, that usually, it just depends on the length of the project, depends on the complexities of the project. If you have more permitting, it takes longer, but it can be anywhere from 18 to 24 months to go through that process. And then you have a full set of plans, it gets bid out, contractor gets to work, and it's built. So that's typically, that's very high level, but that's the process that will occur once this feasibility study is complete.
Matt, I was also wondering, since I think we talked about in a little detail almost every piece of our web here, but we didn't really talk about the easternmost piece. Would you want to just take a brief look at that?
Yeah, I'll pull that up here. Yeah, so like I said earlier, we were looking at three basic alternatives: north, south, and central, and then a few at the time we called them sub alternatives were added, and it kind of turned into the spider web. But they all come together at the YMCA. There's just with the Turnpike and the Norfolk Southern Railroad, there's really no good crossings of the Turnpike and Norfolk Southern Rail until you get to the recently opened portion of the Pennypack Trail under the Turnpike. So, and connecting to the YMCA community resource, that makes a whole lot of sense. The potential to spur it off to the high school and spur it off up into Hatboro someday, that makes a lot of sense. But to be able to make that connection to the Pennypack Trail, we looked at a few different alternatives, and we sat down. We've met with the folks at Carson Simpson Farm. We've met with PERT folks, and these are right now the two different alternatives that we're looking at in this area. There's pros and cons to each one, and we're going to be having some more meetings with folks in this vicinity to discuss the potential routes, and we may be looking at routes that are not on the map right now. So it's not to say that either one of these are a lock, because there are sensitive habitats in the area. There's floodplain, there's wetlands, there's some right-of-way constraints. So there's a lot. This is a particularly difficult area to look at because of those constraints. There's actually a parcel that's located in this area that has been deeded over to the township, but there is a deed restriction where trees cannot be cut down. So we have to avoid or try to avoid that parcel in order to fulfill the deed requirements. So a lot of things like that once you start doing the research on, you come to find out, and it helps inform where the route might go.
Matt, looks like there's one last question here, which is probably all that we have time for. This is from Jeff. They ask, was Mason's Mill Office Park looked at as a cut through via the bridge that exists within the office park?
We did look at that, and we actually have a meeting with that property owner coming up soon. So it's potentially something that could come on the table, but I don't want to say anything, definitive until we meet with the property owner and discuss what the possibilities are. But yeah, we're aware of the bridge through the office park, and but yeah, we just won't know more until we meet with the property owner.
Great. Actually, we have one last question, I think, which is a really good one to end on. James asked, how do we stay informed? And I think the best way to stay informed is to check in occasionally with our website for the project, which is already in the chat, but we can put it back in there. It's montcopa.org/Cross County Trail East. Oh, and Matt just put it back in. And so that's definitely the best way. Also keeping in touch with, if you live in Upper Moreland or Hatboro, that's also, or any of the nearby municipalities, they should also have information on this project. We involve all the area municipalities in our planning group, so there will be as up to date as they can be. But yes, and so we'll also be able to, we'll be posting this video if you ever want to watch it again, and then we'll be posting any other updates on the website. Also, for any announcements about future events, you'll find them on the Montgomery County Planning Commission's Facebook page, and your respective municipalities' Facebook page as well, I think.
I just shared a link in the chat. It's the Facebook post for this round of public input. We'll get this video posted, if not tomorrow, then by early next week. So folks can watch this Q&A session. But if you have Facebook, share the posts. We want to be able to spread the word as much as possible about the map being open through the end of the month. I can't remember the exact date that we said. November 22nd. Monday, November 22nd will be the cutoff for taking comments on the map. So you still have a few more weeks to comment on the map. Share it through your social networks, share it with your neighbors and friends, because this is the stage where your input is really the most important. Once we get into the engineering stage, the route has been set, and the input is more on kind of the details of the plans at that point. This is monumental, the type of input people can have right now on having the trail here or somewhere in between. So yeah, any community groups that you're involved with, let us know if we can send out more materials. Brian's email is listed on the website, so you can get into direct contact with him, shoot him a message. But yeah, this was a fantastic night. I'm glad everybody came out and joined us. Thank you so much for the good questions and conversation. This was great. Brian, I'll let you close it out.
Yeah, well, I think that's it. Thank you all again for joining us, and be sure to check out our website for any updates. And we appreciate your input and your questions. Thanks so much, and have a great night.